can't let her escape. Slaughter them all, and we'll sort this out once we find him.
Can I help you?
What is it? You've a task? What you want?
I am at your service. Once more, under the breach, dear friends!
Hello everybody, and welcome to this video in which I'm going to get very nostalgic for a favourite game of mine, and a game that I have been playing pretty continuously since it was first released many years ago now. I am of course talking about Baldur's Gate, which has been released on PlayStation 4, Nintendo Switch and Xbox One recently, the first time the game has been made available on console. I find it to be the epitome of the Western RPG as far as I'm concerned. I don't think any game has actually quite managed to beat it as yet in terms of its qualities, which I'll talk about a little bit through the video. But before I get to that, I wanted to talk about the port itself first, because I was a little bit concerned about it. Baldur's Gate has always used a mouse and point and click style interface. Previously there was an iPad version released a couple of years ago, but even then you're using your finger in place of the mouse. This is the first time you've had direct control over your characters and needed to navigate the world using a controller, and I was a little bit unsure about how that would work. It works really well actually. I found it to be very intuitive and very easy to use, and I was really impressed by the quality of the port. So even though I'm only into chapter 3 at the moment of what is a very long game, I have played it so many times I've basically got it committed to memory. I just wanted to play it enough to confirm that it works on console as I would hope, and it does. So with that in mind, let's talk about just why Baldur's Gate is such a standout example of the genre. So Baldur's Gate was first released back in 1998, which makes it 21 years old this year. And I distinctly remember going and picking it up and being immediately mesmerized by it, because it was spread across 4 or 5 discs, maybe even 6, but however many discs it was spread across. It was a giant experience, a game, and then just opening it up and having all those discs just promised such a world of adventure. There'd been Dungeons and Dragons games beforehand, of course, but they'd always been relatively limited. I'd enjoyed them all, but they were all played across the single disc. This was the first time that Dungeons and Dragons in the video game arena really took that step forward, that huge step, and became a very kind of defining moment in the development of video games. It was also one of the first games by BioWare, a studio that needs no introduction now, but this was back when they were free of EA's influence and they were able to really indulge their creativity. And you can tell that this game had a real spirit and love of the pen and paper experience in there. This was the first time that, I guess, an RPG that was truly non-linear, in the sense that you could really pick the characters that you wanted to partner up with. You could explore anywhere in a massive world. You could go in any direction. You'd end up killing yourself a lot of the time by going to areas where the enemies were just too tough for you, but that was part of the experience. It was, about exploring and pushing your limits and finding where you could go and what kind of stories you could get out of it. Because this was also the first game where the main story sometimes felt like a bit of a distraction, because you're too busy indulging all the kind of the side quests or the secondary stories or the character stories. So for a good example, Minsk, who became a very favourite RPG hero thanks to his little space hamster that he carries around, or what he thinks is a space hamster. He was a little bit nuts, was good old Minsk. But he had an entire storyline of his own where you had to go and rescue a wizard companion of his from a Knoll prison. And that all of that stuff was completely optional. You didn't actually have to go and do it if you didn't want to. And that, to young me back 20 years ago, was truly amazing. It really felt like for the first time I was able to take control of my characters and really write their story along as I was playing. And for a time where most RPGs and most games were quite linear in design, that was something special. It was a game that was also intensely well written, and one of the first games where you really had control, I guess, over the moral destiny of your characters as well. You could choose to partner up with evil characters if you wanted to. You started out the game as just a single character, unsure about what you actually needed to do in the world. You had to piece that together as you were going, and you could fall in with bad crowds. You could partner up with two evil characters right from the start, and those evil characters would really determine, I mean, if you stuck with them, that would really determine how the rest of the plot kind of flowed out. And again, it was all very non-linear. It all felt very open. And as you explored, you'd have all these chances to meet such a diverse range of different characters. Each of those characters had their own stories, and each of those stories was, again, intensely well written. So you had a lot of control over what you were doing. You had a lot of control over your interpretation of what Baldur's Gate offered. And it was great. It was true RPG gameplay. It's something that you saw in Dragon Age, but BioWare's own Dragon Age. But even in Dragon Age and Mass Effect and everything that BioWare has done since, you know, becoming part of EA, all of that stuff feels a little bit scaled back. They've got more well-written characters, I guess, but that same sense of being truly open is just not there. And the same the range of characters that you could partner up with or not partner up with is just much more limited. In both Dragon Age and Mass Effect, you always felt a little bit more led through the nose in terms of how you experienced the world and how the overall narrative played out. Combat was great too, and the developer really hit all the notes about what a Dungeons and Dragons fan would want to get out of the combat. You started off fighting the very weakest enemies, like the kobolds, which are icons of Dungeons and Dragons for low-level players, and you would slowly move up through increasingly difficult enemies, just as you would expect to. But none of that felt arbitrary either. Because you were in a fairly well-populated part of the Dungeons & Dragons world that this game is set, it would have been quite easy for a lot of the kind of the enemy encounters to become forced, in the sense that you felt like you might have felt like the developers just put the enemies there to put enemies there. But that wasn't the case. You could actually go exploring and not come across enemies for quite a while in the relatively peaceful parts of the world. Whereas if you went to the more dangerous areas, you would be beset by enemies basically on every step that you took. And again, it just contributed to this sense that the world was really alive and breathing. And I love the combat system as well, the way that you would pause the combat to issue your character's commands, and really felt like you had a lot of control over the strategy side of the game as well, because you were managing 6 characters, and those characters all had a very diverse range of skill sets and so on. And you had a lot of control over how they developed those skill sets. You really needed to be able to pause the game to be able to issue commands and stuff, and that was something that hadn't really been done much before in the past either. Combat was either purely turn-based or it was purely action. There wasn't that kind of meld between turn-based and action combat that Baldur's Gate really pioneered, where you got the sense of the visceral nature of the combat, but at the same time you could always slow things right down if you needed to take a moment to take stock of the surroundings. Just here on the screen you're seeing one of my favourite conversations from the early part of the game. There's this guy that's lost his son from memory. It's been a while since I read over that dialogue tree, even since starting to play the game again. But I believe he's lost his son because his son went off and tried to become an adventurer and got himself killed. So he has this grudge against adventurers. And if you selected the wrong options in the dialogue tree, he'd just attack you. You know, he'd been driven mad in rage and grief. But if you selected the right dialogue option, you actually get a chance to make peace with him. And that just showed you that you needed to pay attention to every conversation, because the direction that the results of those conversations could go could be very dramatically different. And I loved experimenting with things. I loved to replay the game over and over with different character classes, with different character types, to find out how the narrative and the plot would evolve, to find out how I would interact with the world differently under different circumstances. And that's why the game is so replayable to this day. Like I said, I'm actually playing through right now with a character that I hadn't played before, because I believe this port includes some characters that Beamdog, the developer of the remaster, had added in later. At least I don't remember some of the characters. So I'm having a great time re-experiencing this game. Anyway, if you haven't played Baldur's Gate before, you absolutely have to. This is a masterpiece. This is one of the top 10 games ever developed. And now that it's on console, it's quite easy to play if you're not usually a PC type, which is fair enough. And the port is really good, like I said earlier. So give it a go. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please back me on Patreon if you enjoy my videos, and I'll do plenty more of them. Otherwise, we will see you at the next one. Thank you for watching.